Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. We've heard of looking before you leap. Well, this week the state school systems looked at LEAP as the latest school test scores were revealed. Mayor Cantrell's review of one city department was to call it a cesspool of harassment. And a strategic plan was announced for the development of the area around the abandoned charity hospital. In a week in which the Archdiocese admitted to some past sexual infractions among clergy, we'll look back at the handling of such issues over the last 3 decades. Our Future Watch segment investigates progress of the South Shore Harbor Development Project. And with the recent death of musician Henry Butler, we'll examine the condition of the New Orleans piano-playing tradition. At the keys for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jason Berry, freelance journalist and author of the books Lead Us Not Into Temptation and Vows of Silence. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And Jessica Williams, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go over to Jessica first because the LEAP scores came out, and it's LEAP testing that's across the state, and the state releases scores for all school systems. So how did we do here in Orleans and in the area generally?
Generally, most of the New Orleans area school systems saw a bit of gain, which was good. If you remember last year, there was some decline across a lot of the school districts locally. Orleans, in another year in which the scores for both the Recovery School District and the Orleans Parish School Board, which are now unified, were counted together, was at the bottom of the pack, unfortunately. We saw Plaquemines doing really well this year, having most of its students meet the new mastery bar. And this is something that, you know, the state education officials have really tried to emphasize in the last couple of years, is this new, what we call mastering content of English, math, social studies, and science. Whereas before, you just had to show that you had a basic competency level, you kind of knew what you were doing in those 4 subjects. Now you have to really be able to detail your responses to these questions and really be able to show a competency level that the state has said is really what's going to prepare you for college, as opposed to what was there before.
So LEAP testing is done primarily in what grades?
In the elementary school grades, 3rd through 8th grade. There have been some LEAP tests that have been aligned to high schoolers. However, the LEAP tests are more important for elementary schools because it's the way that the state judges how well elementary schools are doing. The school performance scores that come out every year, a huge portion of those school performance scores is dependent on those LEAP scores.
And so by school performance scores, you're actually talking about schools now are given grades that parents look at very closely.
They do. They get a score and they get a corresponding letter grade. So that's what you see when you talk about A-rated schools, B-rated schools. There's scores that go along with those letter grades. And for the elementary schools, the LEAP scores are a big component of what they look at when they're determining what grades to give a school. Now, this is another change this year. In addition to just looking at the year-by-year results of LEAP tests, the state is also going to judge how well individual students are doing over time. So if, you know, student A walks into class and, you know, they may have not scored a mastery on the LEAP test, but they got a basic this year. And last year they got an approaching basic. The state is going to take that into consideration when it is compiling the overall score for that school, because it shows growth and how well teachers are bringing even the lowest kids up to the level that they should be. And that's something that some teachers have really wanted for a long time and really campaigned for, and it's a new change that's going to be put into the school performance scores that we will see out this fall.
In the fall is when the performance scores come out. So once again, if you can just sort of describe, there is the mastery and then through basic. So how are we working toward more emphasis on the mastery? How is that impacting teaching in the classroom? How is that impacting curriculum?
It's really impacting, you're really able to see which school systems are getting the right sorts of curriculum so that they can bring their children up to that level more quickly. One of the problems in New Orleans is that because the school system is decentralized, you have different schools that are doing their own curriculum and may or may not be aligned better with hitting that mastery target, whereas a traditional school district can move toward it more quickly because it's one team, it's one curriculum specialist that's sort of telling these schools what to do. And that's one reason why Orleans, you've sort of seen them be at the bottom of the pack when looking at how many kids are hitting mastery overall. And just to be clear, there are 5 different performance levels. Approaching or unsatisfactory is the lowest that you could possibly get. Then approaching basic, basic, mastery, and advanced. And what the state is really emphasizing from now until 2025 is really working towards getting all kids to at least the mastery level. And advanced is great if they can get them there, all the better. But the basic and below is really what's going to be phased out. An A school is one that's going to be considered where all of its students are at least hitting that mastery in the next few years.
Is there a district?
And mastery really is described as really knowing the
Mastering the
concept,
in
and
other
knowing
words.
the information on it.
Is there an
Sorry.
advanced district in our area or
No,
school? Or
the state average is really only a third of students are hitting even the mastery. The advanced numbers are much lower. What you do see in some of the schools where they're so-called magnet schools, where you take an admissions test in order to get in, those schools, because they educate some of the smarter kids, a lot of those students, sometimes half at some of the schools I was looking at in Jefferson Parish the other day, are hitting advanced and mastery. But for the most part, you're seeing relatively small numbers of students still at this stage hitting the mastery. Because remember, we also implemented the new Common Core standards, which was a national set of standards that was generally considered to be tougher than what we expected our students to know in Louisiana a few years back. So on top of the Common Core, you're now seeing schools that are also being asked to hit a higher state standard, the one of mastery, in addition to just those tougher guidelines.
I have to, toss in here, my colleague Paula Pendarvis and I just recently completed an hour program called Assignment Education, part of our Reshaping a Greater New Orleans series, taking a look primarily at Orleans and what's happening. We touch on that and also the expectations, because the curriculum is going to be tough, and that maybe some of the letter grades will drop, but they expect those to continue to pick up. But basically the bottom line is it's a continuing challenge, and there's a lot of effort that is being put forth to educate our children. So anyway, Assignment Education will come on again July 18th, and then other times it'll be aired too. So you can check the WYS schedule for future airings of Assignment Education.
Exciting.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it was a very interesting project to do. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Over to Jason now. We heard this week, or in the past couple of weeks, another settlement that the church made with someone who claimed to be a victim of sexual abuse involving clergy from really just a few decades past. This is something that the church has been wrestling with now for decades. You've done a lot of research and investigation into this. What are you finding about how the church is now handling these allegations and claims by, alleged victims? What is the church doing about this?
Well, excuse me, they are taking a much more pragmatic approach to settling cases, rather than to drag out litigation and to battle, as was the case, say, 20 years ago. It really bears saying, too, Marcia, that this is an issue that has arisen across society. The Me Too movement, the Harvey Weinstein cases, Michigan State, the coach of the...
Larry Nassar.
Yes, exactly. So I think Western society in general is coming to terms with the abuse of power sexually. Obviously, there's a big difference between children or young people and adults. It's one of age and severity, typically. What is most interesting to me is what the Pope is doing. Francis, of course, came from Argentina, which has a very different legal system than the Western countries, the United States, Canada, Australia, Ireland, the United Kingdom, where these scandals really became major legal sagas. And of course, the press, getting the documents, began to chronicle these cases. So just recently, the entire hierarchy, all of the bishops in Chile, resigned, tendered their resignations because of a long, aching crisis that has pulled that country into so many directions. And so he's now deciding which of the bishops he wants to keep and which resignations he'll accept. I think the central problem is that the church really needs an independent judiciary in Rome, so that the Pope himself is not drawn into each one of these national dilemmas when they arise. You could still maintain the Code of Canon Law as an administrative legal system, But having an independent judicial system for prosecution would take that responsibility out of the Pope and the cardinals whose responsibilities bear upon it. I think that will happen. I don't know how many years it's going to take. But in the meantime, we have this remarkable spectacle of a Pope who is starting to actively intervene in different countries where this is going on. What happened in New Orleans, at least from what was reported here, is, I don't want to say typical, but it sort of tracks what is going on in many other states involving cases that go back a great many years. There have been large settlements, there have been bankruptcies, there are, I think, several grand jury reports ongoing right now that have not yet been released. In a way, I think if the bishops were to follow closely the 2002 Youth Protection Charter, which they voted on, they would be in much better shape. How someone can slip through the cracks is a story of internal secrecy, and I would only say that this happened several decades ago when we had another Archbishop, Philip Hannon.
Well, and speaking of Archbishop, our present Archbishop, Gregory Aymon, wrote a long response to the New Orleans Advocate, which had covered the stories of this defrocked deacon from, 1988, who was a lector at a Metairie church as recent as last month and shouldn't have been. So Gregory Aymon is dealing with this directly.
I would say so. You know, it's hard to know how a given individual who is removed, and in this case he was tried, according to the newspaper report, in Jefferson Parish in the late 70s, a jury trial, he was acquitted,
right,
and then apparently came back in and then went out. How someone comes back as a lector, I would assume, is a decision by the pastor of that church. Whether he's reporting everything to the Archbishop, we don't know.
But as a process, though, the church is dealing with this a little bit more directly than perhaps had been done in decades past.
Oh, absolutely.
That's essentially what I'm hearing you say.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a process, and I mean, in fairness to both Aymon and the newspaper, he does have a record of settling cases rather than covering them up thus far. We don't really know all of the facts involving how that former deacon got into his position, but some of the plaintiff lawyers have actually praised him for being reasonable in negotiating settlements.
All right, Jason, as always, very interesting. Thanks a lot.
Sure thing.
All right, and over to Dawn now, and you're going to update us on what's happening at South Shore Harbor. I mean, we heard, what was it, about last year, a year and a half or so?
It was about 2
Big
years
plans,
ago,
yeah.
big plans. And just to acclimate everybody to what we're talking about, this is the area that used to be occupied by Bally's Casino prior to Katrina. It is just east from the Lakefront Airport. 19 acres, 3 years ago actually, Ronald von Kernatowski is a developer who signed off on a lease deal with the Orleans Non-Flood Protection Asset Management Authority and agreed to spend at least $12 million transforming that 19-acre site. And that work is really underway. The biggest thing that has changed out there and is attracting visitors to South Shore Harbor, now known as Lakeshore Landing, is the World War II Museum's rebuilt PT-305 boat, which is a rebuilt PT boat, World War II era boat that saw action in the war and was rehabilitated through a lot of effort by a lot of volunteers and a lot of dollars from the museum. But it's now open and available, and has been since March of last year, for tours and actually, not sales, you can go underway. You can go for a ride on the PT boat on Lake Pontchartrain, right there from South Shore Harbor. The other things that are underway there now are a fuel dock, which there's always been a marina, or there has been a marina there for at least the last 40 years. There's never been fuel right there at that marina. So part of this redevelopment is a fuel dock that the pumps are in and should be in place, and that should be open next month, later this summer, as well as a market, a marina store that has everything you need for boating and fishing, plus your cold drinks and your snacks and your ice and your bait, and what you need when you're out on the boat for a day and you stop to get gas. You can get other things as well. There are also there's a pavilion where you really can look over the lake and see the city skyline, and they're doing things like weddings and small events there now. The biggest thing on phase 1 that is not complete yet is the big blue building that did survive Katrina that was there, if anybody's familiar with that area. Huge building, 30,000 square feet. It's going to have roll-up glass doors and be open as they have markets there, craft markets and food markets, sporting events, concerts, weddings, corporate events. The Ironman New Orleans has already said they want to do their big after party there, since that's where their whole action is anyway, instead of going somewhere else. That should be finished sometime next year, probably about this time next year. Phase 2 is a big amphitheater and recording studio and bungalows associated with that recording studio, with a big tie-in to the Berklee School of Music in Boston that would get people to come in and actually record at the recording studio there, and you have the private airport right there. It kind of all works. That phase 2, should be complete sometime within the next 2 years. Mr. von Kernotowski said there's been a huge learning curve about getting power and getting plumbing and figuring out how to rework that area, that everything should be sped up for
So
phase 2.
when does phase 2 begin?
Phase 2, it has not begun construction yet. He just told me yesterday, no more than 2 years. It may be faster. I don't know when construction starts. There is also a restaurant out there now that's had a soft opening. It's called the Y, letter Y, Not Cafe. So you can sit and overlook the boats and the lake. It's kind of a different vantage point on the lake than
And
things.
that's open for business.
First, I
It's
want to
open for
acknowledge
business.
that the Von Turnikoskis are some of the great people in New Orleans, what they did with rehabbing the Orpheum Theater and with Tipitina's. I mean, their work has been good, so I have confidence in what they're going to do. But just imagine when all this is in place, it's going to shift or expand the activity on the lakefront in a direction where there's nothing. Hardly, okay.
There's hardly anything, and you know, a lot of people say, "Ooh, it's in New Orleans East, and is it safe?" And I drove out there myself, but and what Mr. von Kernotowski said is, you know, you're by an airport and a marina, which are two places where there are a lot of observers. It really is. They have had no trouble. They've had nothing missing from their job sites, and all the boaters are there.
But the
Right,
activity
already
pretty
has
much
the
stops
development
at the
continues.
airport, and so this brings it back.
Well, there is a marina,
Yeah.
an almost full marina there now. Lots and lots of boats.
And talking about another proposed plan, well, this one is more than proposed, it's on its way, but the Spirit of Charity District around the area where the abandoned old Charity Hospital is.
What's happening? I know we've all been asking, what's going to happen to Charity Hospital? And things are happening behind the scenes. And last year, LSU, which owns the building, their real estate wing contracted with the Urban Land Institute. Urban Land Institute comes back with this proposal based on other urban studies, proposing what they're going to call a Spirit of Charity Innovative District. And the idea is that you get this area, which is Charity, and several blocks around it, and you make it part of one district with sort of like centralized planning that one helps the other with financing and has its own financial base, and then try to develop that district, and which could be a really powerhouse district if it all happens. So what's happening now, the news this week is that the Greater New Orleans Foundation was sort of like underseas and overwrites a lot of good civic activities, is going to hold a series of public hearings. And then sometimes in September there's going to be this plan that I think people would be signing off on. So it seems to be heading in that direction about the whole charity and the charity neighborhood being part of this innovative district, which sounds like it's a good thing. You know, I was talking to a developer who has a real interest in this project, and he says what he'd love to see what happens, because if you picture where Charity is on Tulane, he'd like to see whatever happens, draw activity across Tulane and between Tulane and Carrollton, and redevelop all of that area too, which would really be just a real economic powerhouse along the area. And so if you have that kind of activity, and then you have the new activity further down with the University Hospital, this could be a real economic rehabilitation. So the next step now is having those public hearings, and in September they hope to come back with a program. But I think the big news is that the thinking is creating a special district with it.
Right, and a plan to go with that special district too,
Yeah.
how to go about
Right.
the future plans for it. All right, E, thanks a lot. Over to Jessica right now, and you did an interview with someone who was in the property management over at City Hall, who's since been terminated, right? His position is
Since
now
been
gone.
suspended and then
Suspended.
retired shortly
Okay, oh,
after.
that's right. Okay, he's retired now. But it's involving a situation that the mayor described as a cesspool of harassment. What was going on over there?
The mayor came into city government in May, and at that time, the Landry administration had been made aware of allegations within the property management department at City Hall that a supervisor was, making really inappropriate comments to some of the women in the office, asking them to have sex with him, just being really inappropriate all around. And the most egregious allegation was that he exposed himself to one of them. And this, from my understanding, with talking to one of the deputies in the office, this is a culture that had gone on in the department for quite some time, and several women had been affected. However, the most recent allegation stemmed around 3 women, one in particular that said that she really felt uncomfortable by what this supervisor did. I reached out to the supervisor in an attempt to get his side of the story. At that point, he told me that he believed that he was being set up over the course of a 2-year roughly span, and basically said that the young lady who accused him of the harassment actually was harassing him. And he and I talked about it. He said that he didn't think it was a big deal what was going on. He thought it was all in good fun. And he admitted to giving her a job reference after these interactions that they would have. But really just, at the time, he said he just didn't think that it was a big deal. And that statement in and of itself sort of illustrated the culture that was in the department that the mayor, I believe, addressed when she spoke with us.
And so you describe in the article that you wrote of something that did occur in the office, which included a dance.
Dancing, yeah. There was a culture in which he would say to some of and these were all younger women, the guys in his early 70s, he would say to some of the women, "Oh, you look really good today, baby." And then that would be in the open office, but behind the closed door of his office, they would come in, he said, they would vent to him about their frustrations with their supervisors, and then sometimes they would pull up their skirts and dance.
Well, that's over at City Hall. That's not really what tax-paying citizens expect to happen within those offices. So what does the mayor say about this, other than cesspool?
The mayor has really made a commitment. She came in and immediately ousted both the deputy and the director, or the director of the department, maybe about a month after this guy was suspended under Landry, but then submitted his own resignation, and is really committed to implementing a new local and state law around preventing sexual harassment. If you can remember, there's been several incidences, even at the state level. Tom Shedler, Johnny Anderson, former Deputy Chief of Staff to John Bel Edwards, also accused of harassing women in various contexts. And so this was created to really up the training that employees are given in city government, and to also put in stricter penalties, protections for people that come forward and report, referrals to the district attorney's office, and fines when this goes on.
To create a different culture.
To create a different culture.
All right, Jessica, thanks a lot. Back over to Jason real quick to wrap up our discussion. Henry Butler passed away recently, just a magnificent piano player. And, what's our piano playing tradition, as Errol wrote? What's it looking like now?
Well, the tradition is strong, but he was an absolute anchor. Henry was just a spirit who played with a left hand that could do so many things. Robert Pinsky, the poet, says that Professor Longhair had the Caribbean left hand, which he did. Henry could do so many things on the piano. Steve Bernstein, his trumpeter and collaborator, told the New York Times that his left hand was so powerful that it would just sometimes blur. I don't know how you emulate or go beyond that. His tribute to Professor Longhair, I was listening to it last night, and he thanks him in the song. He's playing the melody to Tipitina, but calling to the professor, "Thank you for what you gave me." His version of "You Are My Sunshine," the song made famous by Jimmy Davis, is such a powerful, mellow, beautiful blues. I mean, it'll bring you to your knees. What happens when someone like that departs? Well, first, all the records now start to spread on eBay, and I got 2 of them this week on Amazon. But I think people like John Cleary, DeVell Crawford, Joe Crown, certainly John Batiste, who is mostly in New York. But these are the people who come along and take that tradition from Jelly down to Fess, Alan, Art Neville is still with us. It is a dynamic tradition, a living tradition, and I'm sure Henry will be remembered and his style paid tribute to by some of the players coming up.
And Jason, we were talking before the show, but it's relevant to the story that he was blind,
Yes.
but that he was also a photographer.
He was, yeah. Henry, I had a conversation with him once very late at night about local politics, and there was a lot I wish I could say, but too many people are still alive. Henry, in his own way, had a photographic mind, even though he couldn't see. And the photographs he made that are so famous, he stood there, he had a camera, and he had an aide, a friend, who simply said, all right, if you kind of go that way, and so he took the pictures. Once they were exhibited, everybody was fascinated that someone who could not see was so sighted.
And so he also left us a legacy of photographs as well as incredible music.
The music.
And has helped develop this upcoming generation
Oh,
too,
I
with
think
what he's left behind.
Very much so. He had a master's, you know. He was an extremely
Very-
well-read man. He used Braille, but he read more than
And an advanced musician too.
a very advanced musician.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Time to
Okay.
look ahead.
731 St. Charles was once the site of a building in the 19th century called the Washington Artillery Hall. It was where a lot of the early carnival balls were held, including the first Rex Ball. It was eventually converted into a state office building, and then turned down. Now it's being converted into condominiums to be known as 731 St. Charles. But they're going to try to have an exhibit of that carnival heritage there too.
Okay, great. Jason.
Justin Nystrom, a professor at Loyola, has a book coming out on the cuisine of New Orleans, which deals in depth with the influence of Sicilians on what we call French Creole cuisine, and I think it will open our eyes.
I could speak to that. I'm of Sicilian heritage. Done.
Next month, the Marina store will open at Lakeshore Landing, so if you go out there to take a look around, you'll be able to buy a drink and a snack, so
Great.
go take a look.
Jessica.
If you've ridden on the RTA buses or streetcars lately, there is an app that you can download to see exactly where it is, just like an Uber or a Lyft.
Pretty cool. That can help. All right. Thanks a lot, you guys, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. Of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.